You start off with a girl with ice in her veins and you gotta follow your instincts, wait a bit to unleash it. That is because you start off with jabs in your hand, and with players on 7, they are a very effective way to clear the monsters in early zones and get you early levels. Now what do you even do when you get these levels? As an ice maiden, skills for your build don't become available till you get to level 6, and thus your main play is to put the stat points into dex to help you get there. Points in dex not only increase your chance to hit, but also give you some damage increase, something that later areas on higher players require for effective clearing. I decided to get level 5 to 6 on P1, and from here on out I decided to stay at that difficulty. Reason being that as soon as I reached that level and got a point into cold arrow, wield a hunter's bow for that attack speed, you'll get to know what the skill that you have waited 6 levels for can actually do. Answer: it can shatter things one at a time. Now this looks great as a start, but this game and ARPGs in general thrive on AoE, since you won't be fighting a single monster almost ever. What you will be fighting are hordes, and with skills like Cold Arrow, you will have to dispatch of all monsters one by one. Our grievances are alleviated a bit in the tower with a bit of creative liberty, that is to say adding an element of poison in our arsenal in the form of gas potions, whose gas clouds deal AoE damage, weakening boss and minion alike, which can be finished off with cold arrows. Now owing to my affinity to all things poison, I stayed a while longer at the Countess, beyond the Tal Eth grind. That was to get some extra tals for later to throw in a bow for some poison dot. I cleared all bosses on the way to the Countess, which gave me levels and also a 28 Najo. This is where I channeled my internal finance trader and immediately flipped it for 4 purple rocks. Since it was early in the season, I knew I could get a better price on it at the time, and these you will see will be crucial to construct the final build. Now against the poison thought Andariel, it is normal to wish that you were fire arrow instead of cold. However, there are worse elements to be specced into, as cold's inherent defensive attributes help slow Andy down, thus buying me more time to damage the poisonous freight train before having to reposition. One problem that is going to be a constant for this girl due to the nature of the attack is AoE. Strangling gas are only going to lose effectiveness as I move forwards, and thus keeping up with the potency of the poison potions is going to be something that will be a priority of our attack, along with getting points into vitality and cold arrow as well. Things got a little bit easier at level 17 as I could wield stealth and the 3 talbow I made for myself from the runes that I got from the Countess. This new poison dot allowed me to shoot and move, most regular monsters dying from 1 arrow and most bosses dying in 2. Now you get a new cold bow skill at level 18, but if you were dreaming about your AoE problems vanishing when you reach this level, well, keep dreaming because this ain't it. What ice arrow does is a skill which now freezes still your enemies instead of slowing them like cold arrow did. That, and also it does increase damage with enough investment, so even though it isn't exactly the knight on horseback we have been waiting for, we will be investing into it going forwards. Now the freezing capabilities of ice arrow only apply to normal monsters. Bosses are too cool to be affected by it. Get it? Too cool? Anyways, what that meant was that this duriel fight was going to be a bit of a slog. Now I managed to chink down about 25% of his HP while he had it at my merc. Once he was done consuming him though, I was only at the mercy of run walk to create distance between me and the freezing bug to land damage over time dealing shots, and they were the real MVPs of this fight. You can see that every time I turned to shoot, the previous dot had drained a considerable amount of HP from the bug, thus allowing me to finish the fight without a single visit to town. Thus before leaving Act 2, I decided to kick the dot up to 11, the only way I know how: outsourcing. I got an Act 2 merc and gave him a malice in a sputum with a guaranteed chance of open wounds. Now the hard part: keeping him alive. Now to be fair, the council in normal is a hard place for most characters during the first go round, except for our girl. Since she attacks from a distance and can effectively deal like 6 to 7 monsters with dot dealing and freezing ice arrows, this makes it an ideal place for an XP farm up to level 24. This is of course to be able to wield the teleport staff that I farmed from Ormus in the meanwhile, but also the level helps later on while taking on CS. For now you can use the teleport staff to perform one of the most well-known tricks in the game, the Mephisto moat trick. This allows you to kill Mephisto without worrying about his elemental attacks and, just as importantly, his freezing frozen orbs. Now the strat in CS is to shoot and move. This works as you can set down the freeze and dots on multiple monsters and then reposition to dodge their attacks. While you do that, the damage over time ticks and gets the enemies down to the point that the next arrow will take them out. 3 tals is a lot of poison damage, Don't believe me? Ask Diablo. Now yes, it isn't as flashy as a kill with charge strike, but really what is? Shoot and move still forms a good strategy to take out single targets effectively in normal. However, normal is ending and so is the time when the strat is going to be effective. Thus, it is time we big tent this shiz. Thus I decided to XP farm some more, and what better of a spot than Eldritch. Since he's a static spawn in Act 5, I can kill him over and over again, which isn't that difficult of a task. Along with levels, he also drops good loot to sell for gold or just to upgrade your gear, like this Sol rune. +1 to skills, here I come. That, along with the level grind that I did up to level 29, had me confident that I will be able to take on the brothers. Still, it was a bit of a merry-go-round slog. Like I predicted, poison damage from Telltale Tell is only going to carry me so far, and its effectiveness had started signs of slowing already. Thankfully, level 30 is here. Now after level 30, you literally feel like you are playing a different character, a different game almost. That is because you get access to Freezing Arrow. Now first things first, a respec is necessary at this junction since all the points that you would have put into Ice Arrow are going to be wasted since Freezing Arrow only gets cold damage synergy from Cold Arrow. Thus, to maximize carnage, it is advisable to max Cold Arrow, 1 point in Freezing, and then get Valkyrie. Now the two skills I have mentioned at the end will form the offensive and defensive cores of this build, and let me tell you, monsters are about to start to disappear. Now you can still play a dot playstyle since you have the poison damage in your bow, but honestly, why would you? With power enough to smoke normal Lister, it behooves us to do anything but spam arrows and let the damage take care of whatever is in front of us. For bosses like Bale, we have the ultimate distraction spawns of Valkyries. Basically using the same strat that I had since normal duriel, distract and attack, only now I can infinitely spawn my distraction pawn, and she happened to be tankier, allowing me to freeze and kill for longer stretches. Upon reaching level 31, as with all the levels from here on out, I focused on getting points into Valkyrie and Freezing Arrow. This played into the next difficulty as I used the aforementioned skills to do some Nightmare Countess runs. There aren't any particular runes that I needed here per se, but mostly just levels. But the only thing I really made after this sesh was a Zephyr bow, or Et for the faster run walk and increased attack speed. We already do a ton of damage with our skills at this stage, and thus augmenting it with some of that IAS is one of the better uses of resources that I can think of. Lore is unchanged since it boosts aforementioned damage dealing skills, accompanied by stealth and a bunch of other little trinkets that aren't worth mentioning individually, as they all serve simple purposes of giving me some sustain through life and resistances. What is worth mentioning is the fact that Freezing Arrow is sitting at level 9 and it hits like a ton of bricks. Bricks that freeze and shatter on contact. As promised, the skill I will be focusing on other than Freezing Arrow will be Valkyrie, but for now I've invested a few points into Pierce. Now obviously Pierce is a great passive on the Zon and you should always get it, but with this girl in particular whose arrows just freeze and shatter, I don't know how much the investment really makes sense, but it helps lining up targets en route to Andariel. Now my resistances are quite shite because, well, bow is on. Believe it or not, shields form a huge part of the defense that you can stack on your character. Having arrows equipped in their place do little to make up for the loss. Now they are still great since they freeze and explode monsters, but against bosses like Andariel, you can feel wanting for some res, something that you would have to supplement with the likes of antidotes. Other than that, this fight is the standard boss fight affair of placing the Valk down for distraction and shooting while said distraction is happening. I reached level 39 in the Oasis while killing some beetles and put another point into Freezing Arrow. A wise man once said, "Snakes? I hate snakes." And I tend to agree with him on this one, especially with this girl. These guys have high cold res, which means they take longer to kill than what you might be getting used to with this girl, and also they hit like a ton of bricks, which this girl isn't really meant to experience that often. Boy, this is going to be a fun place to face in hell, isn't it? Anywho, duriel time now. In this fight you can really appreciate that putting down the Valk for distraction and then shooting is more of a science than a vibe check. As you can see, without proper timing, things can get messy. Duriel will not be aggroed by your spawn, his holy freeze will slow you down, and in general you will not have a good time. Worse is, if you get the timing down, it will be like a symphony. Offense and defense going hand in hand, allowing you to do the max damage possible while taking the least damage possible. By the time I reached level 42, I had 13 points invested into Freezing Arrow and I was pumping further into Vitality to help bolster my teeny defenses. They hadn't been much of a hindrance because, like I mentioned, you're not really meant to get hit with this girl since you're attacking from a distance, and with an element with excellent innate defensive capabilities. Thus I hadn't really had much incentive to invest in gear or a mercenary. But when the game gives you a 4 open socket polearm and a 3 open socket helmet basically in your lap, it is hard to refuse. I somehow managed to do it still since I lacked the soul for an insight and the IO for a cure, but like I mentioned, not really a pressing matter for me at the moment since the damage from my freezing arrows and the defenses from the Valk were treating me just fine. One upgrade, or I guess augment to my gear that I did do was a wand with lower resistance charges from Ormus. I had been checking this since starting Nightmare and Akara, Drognin and Ormus since this will help boost my DPS against pesky cold resistant monsters and bosses. Clearly, I did not believe that Mephisto belonged to that echelon, and maybe rightly so. Timing the Valk was much easier with him due to his damage not being as immediately threatening to the spawn, and thus I could leave her out longer and go at him with freezing arrow for longer. He ended up dropping me something to help my defenses further. I mean, sure, the attack speed increase doesn't really help me for my frames, but the slow target by 30% is a great augment to my freezing capabilities, especially against bosses, which will take multiple hits before going down. In all honesty, monsters that took that was only growing as we went deeper into the axe. Cold resists really start popping up, and this is where you start appreciating how broken something like cold mastery is on a cold sword. Without the support of something like a negative cold rest stat, which I know in hindsight I could have gotten on something like a Visendraw, these cold resists really start to pile up and right quick. Still, it's not that bad. I got a P-Ami from Hellforge. I would have liked a Lem, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. In Chaos, I had the most trouble with the Necromancers due to their naturally high cold resistance, but not to the point of catastrophe. This girl is still an absolute beast while clearing packs, and she really let it show. Against singular lizards, it is the meat shield timing game again. One which can be shortened by a considerable amount if you remember to use a lower res wand. Do as I say, not as I do, people. For example, taking the skill points from Izzy's quest as soon as you can get instead of leaving them till the end of Act 4. To be fair, there isn't much to invest in, and thus you will be dumping them into Valkyrie. Ah yes, it is that part of this girl's journey when she just stops getting stronger. For most characters, this point comes late in hell, and for many it doesn't come at all till you reach level 99 by the time you max out all your skills and their synergies. But with this girl, all you have to put skill points in is freezing arrow and cold arrow. Ice arrow does nothing but increase the freeze length of your arrows, and thus your main damage component kinda stops getting stronger at this stage through skill points. This is where the perfect amethysts come into play. Remember those? The things that I sold my Nagel for right at the start of the season? Well, they are about to pay huge dividends as I will be using them to buy the entirety of Mavina's battle hymn. Now, I will be the first to admit that full character sets are underrated, but this one maybe deserves its underrating? Now, it is astonishingly cheap. The most expensive of the items was the diadem, which I had to pay 2 of the purple rocks for, and if I waited for a week or two, I'm sure I could have gotten that for a singular Ami as well. But just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's good value. The main thing for this being that it doesn't offer the answer to the biggest problem that this girl has been facing, lack of negative enemy monster res. Not that there are a few things that it does give, but we will get to those in hell, since I decided to wait for the respec till the turn of the difficulty because I don't know, I like shooting cold arrows at screaming muscly dudes all afternoon. No, that actually sounds plausible. The actual reason was that what I was about to do, I believed I could do with my current gear, just faster, bail runs. That was because my current gear consisted of stealth and zephyr, both of which give me faster run walk. Now to augment that time save, I started using decoy in this fight as well, which is a strat as old as time. Simply place the decoy in front of Bale and he will focus his decrepify on her instead of you, something that a melee attacker like our girl can very much appreciate. Also yeah, in this clip I had already respec'd, so let us run down what that process was like. I started at level 70 as my hell benchmark, which is used on almost all of my characters. I put the requisite points in strength and dex, which were a lot. That is because I have to equip both a Kraken shell and a GMB, after which I can go all into whiteout. As for the skills, this really shows where this girl deserves love but hasn't gotten so from Blizzard. 40 points in, you are all done with your damage dealing skills and are left with 26 dud skill points, which yeah sure, Amazon passives are some of the best, but nothing makes up for that lacking offense than something as simple as an ice arrow synergy would have given. Well, since passives is our lot, I decided to go ham on Valkyrie, taking her all the way. Then because I was feeling a little bit frisky, I got some physical bow skills to have somewhat of an offensive line against cold immunes, which I then rounded out with getting some haphazard placements into penetrate and pierce. To round out my gear paired with the set, I went with some rare boots boots, rings, and amulets, basically all focusing on resistances, which in all fairness I get a ton from the set as well, with the full set giving me 50 and one of the item bonuses giving me 20 extra of where that came from. Like I mentioned, something this set lacks is some outstanding stat to boost my damage. Still, it does boost percentage increase cold damage on my gloves and a ton of skills, which for the intents and purposes of the difficulty that I was in, that is Nightmare Bale, was more than enough. In Hell, it's a different story. Right off the bat, Act 1 throws probably the most amount of cold immunes that you're going to encounter, and that guided arrow that I put a few odd points into on a whim, yeah, I mean it's better than nothing, right? And with the Valkyrie, I was even able to take down something like Corpse Fire. Fighting enemies that are too cool for my attacks is not something that I want to do on the rigs. Thus, I turned to fighting hot gals like Andariel. Now against monsters which actually take cold damage from my skills, Mav's set is for all intents and purposes OP at this early stage of Hell. Sure, I don't like two-shot Andy or anything, but the well-roundedness that this set gives me cannot be disputed against, which is why I'm using it instead of a gear set focused on this bow. Don't get me wrong, she's a beast with that minus 20% enemy cold resist, which is going to do a lot more than the numeric value of that stat indicates. However, getting my defenses in line would have been a lot harder, and that 70 all res does stand for a lot. It lets me thrive in situations where I would be struggling to survive. Watch the mercenary eat shit in this clip, while my Zon basically stays on full. Then come the snakes. Yeah, bar none, hardest place in the game for this gal. My strat for this place was to withdraw as much gold as I had stored from my stash and basically turn my girl into a sorceress with endless repairs for her teleport staff. If you can't beat them, avoid them. Introvert strats. I had to employ some of those in the tombs as well, since I rolled some with cold immune unravelers, but the Valk proves to be a valuable distraction asset in situations of this sort. The same is true for fights like Duriel too. This is another one of the benefits that full maps gives me. Thanks to all those plus skills that I have from the full set, my Valk is at an uber high level, meaning that I don't have to resummon her constantly, and thus I can focus my spamming energy on attacking Duriel instead. Now Act 3 is a tale of two cities. One is Lightning Immune Heaven, where you follow in the footsteps of your arrows without missing a beat, because by the time you get there, your arrows would have blown up almost all enemies that are acting as obstructions without leaving a trace. And then you get to Cold Immune Purgatory. In Cold Immune Purgatory, you die. Yeah. So basically, these critters known as flares can spawn either cold or lightning immune, and based on what they do, it's basically going to decide what your mood is going to be like for the rest of the day. Now, that in itself seems like a petty reason to go on a lengthy farming session, but let me be emphatic in saying nobody likes getting beaten up again and again. Thus, I decided to change things up a bit. Now, there's a place where there is notoriously no cold immunes and all your magic fine dreams are supposed to come true. You may have heard of it. They're called Ancient Tunnels. And this, in retrospect, is where everything went wrong. So you may have seen the post by now and may be wondering why this season 12 video, oh I don't know, is a year late. I don't know yet because I'm scripting it. I still have not found that big pull that will make this video see the light of day, but damn it, I will give it my all to make it happen. Cue up some montage music, editor. So actually the first drop is the only one that I actually sold, and it was a 5 open socket crystal sword, and I knew I could get a mal for it any time of the season on the ladder for it. What followed were some 30 faster run walk dual res boots, no FHR/MF to save them though. Unique amulet has a potential, and this was one of those instantly wheel type of situations since it was a cat's eye. Next up was a pole rune, and followed soon by a vex rune. Boy did I see a lot of these during my travels. Next was a pair of soul drainers. None of these things sold, by the way, since they happen to be just niche enough that nobody wanted them. Just like this rock stopper. I swear, such a cool item, but so hard to find a use for in the softcore market. The next one is always useful, but since it was my first, I decided to keep it for myself, Geed's Fortune with 24 MF. Oh, and then another Vex rune interlude, because, you know, we gotta have those. Then I found a Warcry skiller, niche, and worthless, just how we like them here on this channel, and then a Metal Grid. Why not? Why the F not? Couldn't be High Lords for a freaking Ohm rune. Nope, had to be 440, 33 all res, Metal Grid. Ah yes, the Metal Grid of Rings was up next, with Projector. These are surprisingly cheap on the market, and thus I didn't even try to sell my 14% disappointment of a find. The same story with the Raven Lord. This actually could sell, but not when it rolls with only negative 16% fire resistance. You know what though? At least I found good use for the Vex runes that I found. I cubed them up to an Ohm and got a CTA out of it, which rolled Yeah, I sold it for another Rex. And finally, Drax. Of course. When the game is taking the absolute mick out of me, it has to throw in a pair of Drax. Well, that was a month full of drops, and in the end I had basically jack all to show for it. Then PT2's new season came out and I played that for a month. Link for the video in the description. I think it's pretty cool actually. Then 22 Nights of Terror came along and I was like, you know what? I was gonna beat the game to take advantage of this event, and thus I went on my way to take on Act 3. My gear had not changed, but what had changed was my level, and boy howdy did I learn how much levels matter in this game. At level 89, the damage I was taking from the monsters didn't even get me to blink an eye. Chance to hit being level based actually plays out in my favor here for once, and I bobbed and weaved my way to Mephisto. Act 3? Down. Now no amount of leveling was going to help me take down the guaranteed cold immunes that spawn in chaos. Thankfully during my leveling I had the foresight to spec guided arrow, which I could use to effectively dispatch of them. Now sure, it was a bit arduous, but most things in life worth having are. Act 4? Down. Now Ancients. The plan was to separate the suckers, and the strat was freezing some in place while leading the others by teleporting. Maddow got separated first. I was fine with this. The goal really was to get Korlik while the merc was still alive, but since with him being faded and also a high level like me, he survived Maddow pretty good. I pulled Talik in next somehow. Again, not ideal since he has a chance to kill the mercenary, which will make the Korlik fight a pain, but man do I underestimate how good Fade is. I think he took even less damage against Talik than he did against the throw guy. Finally, Korlik. Now the fight with him was still a pain, even though I had my mercenary with me for the whole fight. The reason? Korlik was too intent on playing Ringer Roses with me and just would not lock target away from my Amazon to let me have a clear shot at him. Finally, I had to bite down on the mouthpiece and face tank him, which led to a few close calls, but all worth it in the end since I was able to finish him off with guided arrow. Now with the Ancients down, bail was no problem, and finally I had unlocked my access to the best terror zones in the game for 22 nights. I chose Andariel. Why? Well, terrorize Andariel is just like the ancient tunnels, just with breasts. And who the hell doesn't like that? Well, someone who has been doing this for freaking 3 months and probably just wants it to be over so that he has a video that he can upload. Actually, I kind of made a good time for myself during these terror zone runs. I used to come back from my 9 to 5, get myself a grilled cheese and a tomato soup, and put on my top 5 movies of all time, and then go ham on Terrorize Andariel on the PS5. Now you've heard me talk over drops forever by now, so you know what? Here are my top 5 movies of all time. Number 5. Godfather 2. Great movie, great acting, great plot, great characters, and my god does Al Pacino act his ass off. The reason that it's at number 5? Because the whole time I can't help but wish that I was watching Godfather 1. Number 4. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now this is my wacky pick of the bunch. Why do I like this movie? I guess it was the weather. I don't know. I like movies, I love Brad Pitt, and this is a movie with Brad Pitt about the life of movie stars, and it has that thing, that LA magic that I grew up watching in like I Justine vlogs. And okay, I'm rambling. Anyways, number 3, Pulp Fiction. Do I gotta justify? It's Pulp Fiction. Number 2, Godfather 1. Great movie, great acting, great plot. And while I'm watching it, I am glad that I'm watching Godfather 1 and nothing else except number 1, Dark Knight. Best action movie. Not an argument, not a debate, simply stating a fact. So yeah, I was gonna build like an ice for this girl and make her super expensive and try to kill the Ubers with her, but at this point, let me just do this. And this. And this. Dude, look, spears on, okay? Still a freaking cool build. I can't believe I have never self-healed infinity in this game because goddamn this is a good weapon. Never mind the conviction aura, which also frees up the mercenary to wield an insight for infinite sustain, but you have faster run walk, huge negative enemy lightning resistance, crushing blow, vitality, and magic find all built into one expensive amalgamation. This is what the whole video has been building towards, folks, and by golly is it fun to use. Here is some stock footage of me destroying a Countess tower while farming keys as evidence. Paired with this is a circlet, but not the expensive one with the negative enemy lightning res. No, I'm using a Kira since this is strictly an Uber focused build. And what is important to not do in an Uber's fight? Getting frozen. and also not dying. Yeah, that also helps. And the 53 alt res and cannot be frozen accomplish both goals in one slot. Also, I have a 4-3 facet in here which I bought for this much to get that pseudo Griffin's effect. Metal Grid sits proudly in the Ami slot. Hey man, what is the point of finding cool things if you're not going to use them? Especially things that don't sell and are actually something that would be useful in the context of the Ubers, with attack rating and all resistances. More resistances coming from Viper Magi. +1 to skills and all res for a few purple rocks is always great, but I have augmented the lightning res with a humble Ort rune as an extra stopgap against the destruction Uncle Mephi loves to dish out. The boots are also my self-found 30 faster run walk dual res. For rings, I love going for a dwarf for the Ubers since the fire absorb is useful against Diablo and the 40 to life is useful against all monsters. Thunder Guards is basically built for this build. Too bad that it doesn't give +3 to charge strike, but all that it gives me is much appreciated, especially that straight 20 lightning absorb. Since the res situation isn't great, that is pretty useful to have against Mephisto. Augmenting that is a 14% lightning absorb from Wisp. Now I do like using both in tandem since Uber Mephisto does demand that kind of attention, and thus I am happy to prepare accordingly for him. Finally are my 20 IS gloves with more lightning res and also fire res. Now the need to augment extra lightning res is explained by the presence of a crack of the Heaven's Grand Charm in my inventory. You need this post 2.6 to deal any lightning damage to Uber Mephisto, which obviously makes you more susceptible to his own damage. A catch-22 which we have tried to offset with some resistance charms, not the least of which is a torch. Now I think I got a pretty decent deal on this one. Zone torches do be expensive, but the +3 skills and the additional res and stats are definitely worth it. So is an Annie, and yes, insert the wave of confused commenters regarding the pricing of Annies on the market post week 1. C'est la vie. These, along with some of my self-found charms, have allowed me to get to a res number which can be considered respectable for uber killing purposes. The fact that the lightning res is not a golden 75 is a little concerning, but a pre-buff from Fade does help in that department greatly. As for skills, it is pretty straightforward. Max charge strike, max all the synergies, and then dump the rest into Valkyrie. Luckily landing at level 17 with the +1 from Battle Command. In terms of merc, Insight, Cure, Tretch, which I will be borrowing for my own pre-buff, and the Prayer Aura, completing the trifecta of auras. Let's kill some Ubers, shall we? First up, Duriel. Now he's the Uber boss against whom I just don't bother. I don't bother pre-buffing with Fade, I don't bother putting the lower res curse on him, the mercenary doesn't even bother attacking him, it's Uber Duriel. Whatever, let's actually get some real fights in here. Now I did pre-buff against Izzy because my cold res was also not maxed. Even with the +60 buff that Tretch granted me though, Izzy can still hurt close range. Thus I do find it handy clearing all the monsters up to him and get a clean area in which to fight him in. Also, casting Valkyries to distract him is great since that will mean that he is not attacking me or the mercenary and I can just stabby stab his face off. Now with Lilith, everything turns up a notch. Not only are the monsters around her much more dangerous, but she herself eats Valkyries for breakfast. Thankfully the notch uptake applies to the damage that I deal as well, and she takes a lot from the charged bolts of Charge Strike and is the quickest uber kill so far. I have a feeling it is only going uphill from here because what is next is... yeah. Hardest fight in the game. Harder still for this girl because Mephisto's level 20 conviction aura cancels out my level 17 conviction. Thus I am left only at the behest of my negative enemy lightning res that I have on my gear and lower res, which does impact him less since his immunity has been sundered. But still, I somehow made it work. And then Diablo jumped into the fray. I swear I was like 2 or 3 stabs away from ending Mephisto and that stupid dancing black lizard had to come in and ruin it for everyone. Okay, Bale then. Everything after that Mephisto fight honestly seems trivial. I mean, just look at how much damage Bale takes from charge strike since he has conviction, lower res and negative enemy light res all on him full effect. Diablo is going to suffer the same fate in just a second. Serves you right, you lizard dick. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about Mephisto. The suffering the same fate part, not the lizard dick part. Well, I guess he doesn't have a lizard dick either. The point is, this fight is hard. Harder still when you run out of rejuvenation potions and have to do a full cow run while Mephisto is still spawned in, by the way, and healing all of that damage back. Well, if this train wreck is not an accurate representation of this season, then I don't know what is. Turns out the answer to all my problems was in my hands all along. Prevent monster heal. Thus I took the hit and went in to jab Mephisto a few times. Sure, I took a death there, but stopping him healing is what allowed me to re-enter a couple more times and get him down. 17, 20, Paladin. Pally start to the next season confirmed? Well, if I didn't do it when I found the 2020, surely I wouldn't do it this time either. Or will I? Yours truly, with love.